Good afternoon again. Aditya said that I'm going to tell you all what we are going to do. Uh, we're not going to do what's on the board. Okay, the debate got over before we actually came up on stage. We felt there was all of us, spoke about the topic and felt that there's no easy answer, but we're going to discuss short term versus long term in marketing. What works, can you compromise, where do you compromise if you have to, when do you do short term, when do you not do short term. So that, that's what we want to discuss, because we felt that we were all on the same side of the table. So let's get started. Gentlemen, if ladies first, suna hai na. Short term versus long term marketing. Okay. uh, Lots of things are actually, in every single function, whether it's finance, whether it's supply chain, you have to be tactical, you have to be long term. I think COVID taught us to be extremely uh, uh, tactical, on the spot kind of decision. What's that populous, change is constant. I think that saying change too, just that the pace of change has changed, continues to change. What's your perspective on short term versus long term? What do you do at Luminous? You don't have to actually tell us about your company. We decided we won't do that. But what's your perspective on how people should, do their balancing, if any, or lack of balancing, if any?
So, for me, it's a very simple definition. What is the role of marketing? I mean, that starts from there. If marketing is to build businesses, they build businesses with brands. So, actually, brand marketing is all about building business. And business over the period of time has become far more volatile than the way it used to be. At one point in time, from my experience, I can say is 5-year plan, 3-year plan used to hold good. But today, as I also had strategy for a couple of organizations, there is no 5-year strategy which holds good. When we did 5-year strategy, then there was pandemic. And then you do long-term forecast, and then you say this will get over in 6-month time, 1-year time, then it landed to 3 years time. And then when you end, there is recession, there is inflation. So there is always some or other parameters, and then the climate change, which is impacting the way the seasonality of the product and the pattern goes. So what's the role of then marketing? Think long term, think short term. I think it's more to do with what is long term and what is short term. Short term, according to me, is to drive sales. And sales will not happen if you don't have pricing, if you don't have promotions, discounts, schemes, activations not done to do that sales. If that sales doesn't happen, then the long term again becomes a discussion for short term and medium term. So long term can be, people say, I mean, I also a lot of time when I don't look at from strategy side, I feel that maybe marketing has a luxury to do brand building, which is intangible, which doesn't reflect immediately in the positioning, it doesn't reflect immediately into revenue, into bottom line. But the reality is depends which stage of the brand building we are into. Is it about relaunching a brand? Then at that point in time, that relaunch is not just a short term, but also a long term strategy. But if it's about building a business, then those parameters of revenue and those parameters of premiums, those parameters of sales, schemes, promotions becomes far more important than what will happen in 5 years' time. So in my role, what I do is it's a fine balance. You need to strive basis what's the objective for that particular time and the period you're driving in.
Thank you. Deba, again, why I'm bringing up the brand, though we decided, is that you work for a brand which is a part of uh, household. It's like a part of the family itself. It's a well-established brand. He represents Voltas, okay? Trust factor, all of it. How do you perceive this long-term versus short-term marketing?
Okay, thanks for mentioning Voltas here. I think I'm proud to be a part of the brand, which has almost been 7 decades in this country. So that's definitely long term. But there is no, I would say, there is no long term gain without a short term leverage, and in business. And I don't think in today's environment anybody can sit on their laurels and say that we're a long-term game player. Uh, I would tend to align with Neelima that it's all about uh, looking at the immediate future and planning henceforth from there. Uh, Look at various aspects of the marketing mix and then see what is short term and what is long term, and that's the fundamental way of approaching this question, because we tend to always see marketing from a lens of advertising, which should not be the case. Marketing is a fundamental pillar for creating value for your organization, value for your shareholders. Uh, Long-term gains come from marketing. So, what are those pillars of marketing which you can use uh, in a short-term perspective or in a long-term perspective? You need to decide that. Um, Distribution is something which is built over a period of time, but it is also immediate in nature. So that's, I would say, midterm. Pricing plays a vital role tactically to achieve your immediate objectives. I think all marketers should be in sales for a good period of time to understand this whole question, because if you haven't been in sales, you're missing out the skeleton of organization. And because sales tells you how important it is to see business on a day-to-day basis. So that's where pricing comes in and tells you how to really use that tactically and keep firm on your shares in the market. Um, Moving on to other aspects of the marketing mix, of course, the brand is something which you have to build over a period of time. You cannot ignore that, because that's where you need to be considered, right? Before somebody walks into the store, you need to be there in somebody's mind. So that goes without saying, and that's a given. That's a given. And you cannot compromise there. Build your white spaces, uh, guard your turfs, create positioning which are long term. Those are fundamentals of long-term brand building that stays. That hasn't changed much, irrespective of what ecosystem you're operating in. So that stays. And of course, coming to the product, which is the most important aspect, there you need to look at long-term and short-term both. Because long-term, why? Because the product has to live with you. Uh, Many of us who were talking in the room before we entered this hall were talking about product which have stayed with them for 15 years, 10 years, and they swear by that. So that's where word of mouth comes in. Nothing better than that. So build products which are long term, build features which are immediate, which can cut across segments, and that's where you are. So across the marketing mix, you have to see what works for you long term, what works for you short term.
Follow-up question, very quick one. Yeah. So have you spent time in sales too?
Of course, I have. Yeah, yeah.
Wonderful. Nitin, your perspective.
So I actually agree with what Deba said on the value creation. From my perspective, personal perspective, uh, is the value creation for the customer first. I see marketing as a overall journey of the brand building. You have to be relevant in the short term to exist in long term. Uh, it may sound tactical to a few people, but if you can't sell in experience economy, you will not exist in the AI economy. And we exist in close to 32 odd business lines, where seven are core consumer categories, touching 400 to 450 million consumers in the group which I currently craft experiences. Uh, for us, last 1,000 odd days has been instrumental in terms of how consumer behaviors have changed and expectations are changing. Consumer want immediate value to have any sort of loyalty, and there I think storytelling plays a huge role.
So when I spoke about Voltas and old family kind of brand, let me distinguish it. Brands that are older than us. You belong to one of them, Air India Express. So how do you look at long term versus short term marketing?
So, I think when we spoke about the marketing mix as well, as Deba said, and we've touched upon, you spoke about promotions, we've touched upon pricing, a bit upon place. Uh, we've forgotten perhaps over a long period of time that product is also one of the primary four P's in marketing, and it takes a long time to build that product. If it was so easy to build a brand that can garner trust from consumers, then you would not see the likes of acquisitions like Air India. You would not see the likes of a Taj being the strongest brand in India. And that's because you have been successful in consecutive short-term periods consistently over a long period of time. So it's not, as we were saying, it's not a short-term versus long-term. There is no luxury of choice to say I can survive the short-term disruptions uh, and focus only on the long-term. But a brand at the essence of it is about trust, and trust is built up over a long period of time. So you need to be able to have that perspective. We spoke about the disruption, right? If you see the nature of industries that benefited from the disruption that happened during the pandemic, no amount of short-term planning could have been able to, or short-term metrics would have survived or held you in good stead for that disruption. And you saw with short-term planning some short-term success. So you saw the likes of a Zoom, for example, whose valuation became greater than the top 20 airlines in the world. But immediately after the pandemic, it's completely down. I mean, you see the likes of what has happened to WeWork in the last 2 weeks. And so uh, with the short term, there is an advantage in the short term. But if you want to be a long-term player and as a brand be around for longer than our lives will survive, because the brand lasts more than the lifetime of the individual, and it often builds loyalty over generations. Then there is a perspective that we must keep in mind that we're building beyond our own careers or beyond our own lifetimes, which is understandably difficult to do in today's context. But that's where legacy comes in.
I'm going to take a question out of a few that we had originally put for a debate. Uh, let's talk about short-term and instant gratification. Bring this question to all of you. We'll start with you, Siddhartha. Are consumers, for instant gratification, are consumers more responsive to short-term tactics, or does a long-term vision yield a more favorable outcome eventually?
Consumers are definitely more amenable to short-term tactics. There's no question about it. I mean, the disservice that we've done, speaking of my own industry in airlines, uh, to the extent that people very rarely care about the brand. Yes, there are certain hygiene parameters. I will not fly with an airline that I don't consider safe. Unfortunately, it's reached a stage today where people will not fly with an airline which may not exist by the time you're flying with it, right? So it's reached to that stage, but it's reached to that stage because people have driven loyalty through price to the extent that the margins are eroded so much because you've not invested in the product or creating the brand or the service that it's not sustainable as a business. And so obviously, yes, people will respond to a price discount, but the price discount is not actually going to help you gain margins. And that price discount today, we have been able to instill that discipline, at least within the industry. If any competition of ours drops prices, we will match prices and take out a campaign within 4 hours of that price drop, which effectively means there is no incentive for you to match, to drop prices. And that's the kind of discipline that we want to bring in. The reaction time for competition, the agility that we have in the industry effectively means that there is no real advantage in doing a sale across any of the brands, whether you look at e-commerce or Amazon or Flipkart, etc. The sales are matched. Those sales may get something which gets you a valuation in the short term, but it's not helping you build the business or even actually surviving in the long term. You're doing a disservice in some ways to driving that. I'll give you another small example that we've taken and invested in the way in which we're doing technology. And I don't mean to take too many examples from my own business, but we've been the first airline in the country to have, or in the world actually, to have not had a loyalty program defined on a frequent flyer number. Because I don't believe that your relationship with me should be dependent upon your number. Why should you have to quote your number to me to tell me who you are and for me to give you loyalty points? And that is just the essence of your mobile number and your first name and last name as a combination are sufficient for me to identify who you are and give you the benefits that you deserve. And it's not just about the points, right? If we continue to make the engagement with the consumer transactional, then you will only be able to get transactional value from the consumer. You will not be able to get the long-term trust or the premium that you command because of the brand that you want to be or the trust that you enjoy or whatever else that you are you're selling as a vision or as an emotion to the consumer.
Neelima.
You know, and I've been thinking about the examples because there are many from our own lifetime. So I personally have sold from condoms to biscuits to refrigerators to laptops to hotel rooms and then finally inverters and batteries. What I realize is I've always found two kinds of consumer. One who is definitely seeking value. They're always seeking deals, they're always seeking value, and they will not pay more. But then I've also come across consumers because of the varied experience on luxury or premiums, which I've sold over Thin and Light, used to sell far more premium, or Oberoi hotels where I was working was far more premium and luxury. People pay for the value which you bring to them. So it's always about these two. Now, this pay for the value which you bring to them has come over the period of time. It hasn't, I can't find any example wherein the brand got created today and in 3 years' time you're willing to pay premium. I think that's where the legacy, the brands like Luminous, 35 years, Tata's for ages, for Voltas for ages, they're built over the period of time certain perceptions, certain value for which I am willing to pay that premium as long as it's meeting my need. But I'm willing to go that premium, 3%, 5%, 10%, depends on that, but I'm willing to go that premium. But then there is also transactions happening. When I'm buying on Blinkit, I am not concerned. Now I'm looking for deals. When I'm going and buying biscuit, I am now again, it's driven by taste, but also I am willing to pay for not so much for a glucose biscuit or not so much for a Mari biscuit. I will compare. So I think it's marketeers have to trade between these two. That when you say you're building a brand that will last test of time, there are parameters which is very different. But when you're saying that I'm here to actually drive business growth, drive market share, drive revenue for this month, and so there is this consumer offer, so there is this customer loyalty program, objectives differ. And for that, then the consumers, when they also see things, they see it differently because now Diwali time, Amazon had such great offers. Now there, when people are coming, they're coming only to seek deals and offers. There, if you're not present, again, you're losing relevance to that business for that particular channel. So I think it's about these two, the way consumers are making choices, and brands and businesses have to be cognizant of that.
Nitin.
Hoshie, let me take Siddharth's point and spice it up a little. So in my previous life, I was leading Indigo. And there are three core principles Indigo got built in India in a very value-centric market. On time, hassle-free, affordable fares. And then with a great network, they captured everything. I saw 28% to 54% market share in 3 years. And trust me, if you don't want to miss your meeting, you fly Indigo. It still stands true. They played with 3 C's very, very, very nicely: creativity, consistency, and context. And they want consumers over and over again. It's a very contradictory view, but I still bleed blue, though I love Tatas.
Yeah, because they built a brand over a period of time, and yeah, there is the thing that if you want to, I might differ slightly on some of the points, but that's a
90,
personal way.
but 90% India still don't defer. They fly Indigo,
No,
and the
no,
market share
no, they
commands
do.
it.
I'm also.
I mean, it's that particular promise and what's the requirement at that time.
Yeah.
So I think I will switch.
Yeah, but they have created a perception, short term to get the mark, and that perception has remained that we are the only ones who are on time every time.
No. So I agree with you. It's not that. So that perception short term has lasted for 16 years.
Yeah, it has.
Yeah.
It has. Yeah. So they have created that perception. Deba.
Very interesting. I think this whole point which you raised about instant gratification, that is purely to do with the competitive scenario around you. No matter which space you're operating in, whether you're an evolved brand or a startup brand or a tactical brand, which is fighting its own battle in the mid-tier space, your instant gratification tools are there to I would say, augment brand choice. So, for example, you're buying a Land Rover, right? You have the money, you have the wealth, maybe you have the finance to back you up. However, if you don't get the right kind of offers when you walk into the store, you may walk back, walk out. So, instant gratification is agnostic to the brand where it stands in today's scenario. Any segment you operate in, you need to see to it that when a consumer walks in, he needs to be gratified in some way or the other. In our category of consumer durables, it's hyper competitive. We are the leading brand, certified by some of our colleagues sitting in the room from JFK. But the fact is that even if we are leading brand, we cannot say that we don't want to gratify consumers when they walk into the room, walk into the store, because it's very competitive. So without instant gratification, whichever segment you operate in, no matter how evolved your brand is, premium, mid-tier, economy, you need to gratify consumers in today's age. Consumers are very demanding, and they have all the right to be. And I think that's the trend we are living with. It may change over a period of time, but I don't see it changing that fast.
Yeah, with the current generation, it doesn't seem. Uh, we've got 10 minutes. I'm going to ask you one question, and I think some of you have answered it in some way, but I still want to kind of stay with it. We are in a time when there is huge shareholder pressure, okay, creating value for the shareholders. There is a quarter to quarter short, that short term instant, we are lead generate karni hai, dhanda karna hai. And, we are on the other side, we are media, so that they were sitting with the company and asked him, what is it that you want? Because I personally oversee the custom business for Business World. And the guy, there's a very sophisticated call happening, and he says, yeah, Hoshie, dhanda karna, he banged the thing, rokda chahiye. Literally, I don't want to name the client, I was quite surprised. I was talking about, there is the current times, the pressure is on shareholder value, instant results in terms of sales, okay? And in all of that, and the pandemic also brought about a lot of tactical things. We keep saying long term is important. Okay, now it's easier for brands like Air India and Voltas because you built a brand and there is a certain amount of repeat customers, recall, all of that's part of your DNA now, that it's there with consumers. How do you measure the success of long-term marketing on a regular yearly basis? I'm not going to say on a quarterly basis. How do you know that, whilst you're doing everything tactically, how do you ensure that, I am on path long-term for a brand like Indigo? Okay, personal opinion, but I think that brand's going now in a slightly different direction. Okay, now the three C's and all doesn't seem to, they're seeming to gain, and it's not just the personal view comes from having heard it from several people. How do you ensure that your long-term investment that you're making, how do you measure that? Where do we start? Should we start with you?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think the one, if you ask me for a metric and pin me down on it, I'd say whatever long-term brand investment you're doing has to reduce the cost of customer acquisition in the short term. So over a period of time, the investment I'm making must reduce my cost of acquiring a new customer, whether it is through advocacy or through loyalty or through any other mechanism, right? That's where your long term is going to pay off in the short term. It's not as easy to attribute that the long-term investment I made 3 years ago, or let's say Indigo's campaign on-time performance for 16 years. Ideally, that is driving some sense of lower cost of acquisition in the short term. So if you to pin me down on one metric, I'd probably say that.
Customer acquisition. Neelima?
No, Hoshie, it's very simple for me. The moment you put investors in front, having handled work with very closely with CEO office and addressing to board and investors, I think the only way to measure in the short term for the long term is the revenue and the profitability. I don't see any other parameter being discussed or to measure. Because rest all, which is not hitting your top line or the bottom line, is all long term. because then I can't measure, because all these ROIs of brand, communication, investment, advertising, none of them shows into the P&L. And to me, I feel that if you have done a marketing activity, it has to reflect either in getting you more premium or increasing your customer base, which gives me more revenue, which is top line. And if it has increased premium, it will show in my bottom line. If it's not showing in these two, then putting up a brand health score wherein my TOMA or top of mind is 95%, my preference and consideration is 60%, means what? So that's number one for me. Number two, if I remove investors from this conversation and then come back and remove board also from this conversation and then come back to only the CEO like Hoshie, who understands sales, marketing, and feels that all the functions are very important, then I do have parameters to actually measure that, look, what is the marketing job which was, or objective which was supposed to be. Now here depends, marketing for some organizations, if it is only communication, Marcom, then the parameter is very simple. Brand health score is a very good parameter to talk about. Acquisition, customer acquisition and cost of acquisition is another parameter. But I lot of time feel that marketing is misunderstood just by Marcom. If I add product and price and promotion into it, then product, all the R&D investments which you're doing, or the product roadmap, the platform investments, the return on those platform investments become the part of marketing objective and measurability. Rest all, you can see it in the numbers.
Nitin.
I think the average transaction value and the customer lifetime value will be the long-term goals we track as a brand, even in current life and previous life. If that is in order, you are consistently getting organic traffic back, it works out beautifully.
For me, let me just simplify this, my answer a little bit, because yeah, of course, we have got a lot of parameters to evaluate how we score vis-a-vis our investments. The traditional parameters which you guys spoke about in terms of brand equity, in terms of recall, awareness, that's important. I don't think we should keep it completely aside, because end of the day, consumers buy brands, they don't buy technology. So you should not forget that. They don't buy commodities, they buy brands. So they walk into a store and they ask for your brand. That's a huge measure. And if they continue to ask for your brand year after year, even if you're not there, it's a big thing. So please believe in that brands are bought because of the trust you create with your stakeholders. On the other side, what Neelima spoke about was the stakeholder management. If your stakeholders see that your brand is creating value for them, I think you've made a dent through investments. Because today you're talking about pillars of creating market cap. And what are those? The fundamental pillars are perhaps your distribution reach, your brand equity, your profitability. So these are the things which you have to keep on investing in. So if your brand is not strong, you will never create that value for your shareholders, and that's going to be a miss completely. So I think two simple points I would like to focus on as I build the brand over a period of time.
Thank you, folks. Thank you. I wish we could have continued this more, but